Hi, everybody. This is Doug Reeves from beautiful downtown Boston. Finally, spring is here. So I'm so happy that you decided to spend some time with me this afternoon. Before we begin the official webinar, would you please use the question function on your webinar to let me know that you have good audio and visual? I'll wait for about 60 seconds to listen to your replies, and then we'll start.
Call from Landry Marbury. Call from Landry Marbury.
Okay, we'll start in just a minute. I'm trying to get the PowerPoint slides up here. Okay, 30 more seconds and then we're going to start. Well, hello, friends. Thanks for joining us throughout the United States and around the world. This is the 90-90-90 Schools Revisited. This research began 25 years ago, and I'm going to give you the latest, literally from yesterday, about what's happening in 2018 compared to where we started a number of years ago. And I'll tell you what's similar, what's different, and what we've learned along the way. I also want to make sure that you have the opportunity for personal and individual follow-up. That's why I've put on this my connection information. You can always tweet at Douglas Reeves. You can text at 781-710-9633, or you can always just email me at dreeves, D-R-E-E-V-E-S, at changeleaders.com. That's dreeves at changeleaders.com. And I'll be willing to have this webinar that includes all of this research as well as your personal interests for your school. There's no cost. We do this for free, and we do it all around the world. So let's get to work. It's always okay to use that question function, as you did just a moment, to stop with questions and challenges. I'm recording this, so you'll also have all the audio, all the visual available to you if you want to share this with your colleagues as well. So here's the original research. And we looked at schools that were 90% poverty, 90% minority, and 90% who were meeting or exceeding state standards. Now, those first two 90s are probably not unfamiliar with you. It's not unusual to have 90% poverty, 90% minority, but to have the same schools that also have 90% meeting or exceeding academic standards was really quite unusual. In the original study that I conducted, of 135 schools, there were only 7 that met that criteria. And I always thought it was amusing that one of the criticisms of that study was, well, the standards aren't high enough. And all I can tell you is, if only 7 out of 135 were meeting these criteria, they were pretty darn high standards. Maybe they should have been more rigorous, but it was pretty darn high. And that really helped us learn more about what the original 90-90-90 schools could do. The other thing about that original study is that we controlled the variables. That is, we had the same per pupil funding, the same teacher and administrator assignment policies, and the same funding for each school. So the same labor agreement, all those variables were the same. Oftentimes what you see in studies of successful high poverty schools is the contention that, well, gee, of course they were better because they had more money, or they didn't have a union agreement, or they didn't have the same teacher assignment policies. But in this study, all those things were the same. So the fundamental conclusion that we were able to reach is that it was practices, not programs. It wasn't technology. It wasn't a particular program. It wasn't a particular mandate. It was the professional practices within the school that really made the difference. So later on, we expanded that study to include more than 2,000 schools, and we included international comparisons. And we focused on sustainability over the course of 5 or more years. I want to particularly honor the work of Karen Chenoweth, who at Education Trust, who I think did magnificent work to say, is this just a one-shot flash in the pan, or can it be sustained over the course of time? And to her enormous credit, she came independently to very similar conclusions that we drew. So here are some of the original conclusions, and then I'll update you to 2018. It was a laser-like focus on student achievement, what we call the trophy case effect. That is, when you walked in the room of the school, you would see literally in the trophy case examples of student work, examples of student writing, examples of great interpretations of literature. The trophy case was the culture of the school. More recently, long after the original studies were done, I found in the trophy case examples of student-written goals in their own language, in their own words. We found a very heavy emphasis on nonfiction writing. One of the things well before the advent of the Common Core was that some schools would have literally a 90-to-1 ratio of fiction over nonfiction, whereas the schools that were doing really well focused on writing to describe, writing to persuade, writing to explain. And that remains now the dominant feature of schools that are really doing well despite high levels of poverty, high minority, high second language environments. We found collaborative scoring, and that is that the teachers agreed on what the word proficient means. They could have had all the rubrics in the world, all the staff development in the world, but if the teachers don't agree on what the word proficient means, then students get a very inconsistent view. And finally, they used power standards. And this is perhaps the most controversial thing that I will say today, but I will tell you literally as of this week, it remains one of the hallmarks of high poverty, high minority, high success schools is that they will decide some standards are more important than others. And they don't accept the assertion that everything's important. They don't accept the assertion that the trapezoid and the rhombus are as important as number operations. They don't accept the assertion that some of the things that we learn in English, like positives and prepositional phrases, are as important as complete sentences. They make distinctions and focus on what is more important. And that's a really hard thing to do when you're getting one demand after another, based upon what people say is important. So one of the things that I've learned in the intervening 25 years, from the start of the research to the question that is really before us, how do you sustain that research? How do you continue it? Is not with one more speech after another. It's teacher-to-teacher communication. And it's what I've called colloquially the science fair for adults. Teachers are the most credible communicators with others. I've been in districts where, and I'll get kicked out of the Staff Developers Union for saying this, they've had all the usual suspects. They'll have me in and my friends in who are really well-known authors and speakers, and nothing happens. What really makes change happen is teacher-to-teacher credibility, teacher-to-teacher communication, direct applicability to students in our schools, and that is all about teacher empowerment that really makes things happen, whether it's in your own state or district or across the country. So what is this teacher-to-teacher communication all about, and how does it work? It's as simple as the science fair. And I want you to envision the last science fair that you were attending, because you probably have in your in your vision, a 3-panel board, $2.59 at Office Max, a left, middle, and right-hand panel. Third graders could do it. So here's the science fair for adults. It's the same 3-panel display, the same $2.59. The left hand is, what was my challenge? The middle is, what was my professional practice? The right is, what were my results? And here is how teachers using this format evaluated it. They identified comparison groups, same grade, same class, same semester in the previous year. So for example, if I'm looking at 7th grade math in the spring of 2018, my comparison is 7th grade math in the spring of 2017. Same grade, same class, same semester, and then I have a very simple before and after comparison. There are also people who will try to do the same class with a different school, but honestly, I don't think that's as helpful as looking at the same kids, same grade, same class, same semester, previous year. So they're really looking at 3 big ideas: achievement, behavior, and attendance. And I know a lot of people only want to focus on achievement, but my counsel to you is include behavior and attendance, because that's what gets your colleagues to buy in. If all you talk about is improved test scores, people will roll their eyes and say, yeah, but we're more than test scores. And I agree. So you can look at percent C or higher. You can look at average GPA. You can look at the percentage who are proficient on performance assessments. But please don't stop there. When you also look at behavior, this percentage of suspensions, so the percentage of non-discretionary office referrals, that really gets people's attention, because that's the sort of thing that people can say, gee, I want to not only have better test scores, but I want to have a better culture. I want to have a better environment for my students. Same goes for attendance. Later on in every year, you'll have students who simply stop showing up if they feel that there is no hope. But if you inspire hope by some of the ideas we're about to talk about, you'll have students who will persist, show resilience, and show grit. So let's talk about some of these things that can really make it happen. Just give me about 60 seconds, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to say what really matters for your students in terms of attendance, behavior, and academic achievement. Take 60 seconds, either with a colleague or to think about it on your own, and then I'll come back. Okay, we're back. You've had a chance to think about this. Now let me show you what some of the national evidence says. One school system talked about Ketchup Fridays. I published this in the American School Board Journal. They went from, the challenge was, we've got 385 failures. They went down to 15. Why? Because the number one cause of failure was missing student work. And my request to you would be, before this school year ends, look at last semester's DF rate and just ask why. Maybe it was attendance, they didn't show up. Maybe it was behavior, they were out of control. But I will bet you that the number one cause of failure was missing work. So how do we deal with that? They started Ketchup Fridays, where every Friday, if you're missing work, you catch up. Now, it wasn't perfect. They still had 15 kids who flunked. But what would it mean to your school if you went from 385 failures down to 15? One of the things that it meant for them is improved behavior. They cut their level of suspensions by 55%. They improved attendance. So it's not just about test scores. It's about all the other things in behavior and attendance that went with it. And so it was an opportunity for the faculty to really be creative. Nobody was micromanaging what they did. Just choose some intervention, some small change that might have big results. So let me share with you some things that these people did. The Ketchup Fridays were a good example, where they could literally every single Friday identify immediate intervention to get poor work or missing work done. I might just add parenthetically, what would it be like to never ever on a Friday afternoon have an argument about athletic eligibility? You wouldn't have many of them if you go from 385 failures to 15, because the work is done and it's done on time. It's not sandbagged until the end of the years. One of the things that teachers tell me around the world that aggravates them is not getting the work until the end of the semester. These teachers got it every single Friday. But don't stop there. Here's another one. Here's 7th grade. Kids were not explaining answers to story problems. And I really thought that this was very clever, because the teachers, and I speak as one myself, get really frustrated when we say complete your work, complete your work. But kids didn't know what complete their work meant. So they had models of complete problem solving all around the room. And this was very smart on these teachers' parts. Instead of having a graph before and after, they simply showed the same kid to the same kid comparison. The way that they explained a problem before, very superficially and incompletely, to the way that they explained a problem after. In other words, it doesn't have to be a pre-test and post-test. It can be the same student in their same work explaining how they got better. Here's another one from 3rd grade. 3rd grade reading was far below grade level, but they increased dramatically the amount of time they spent on reading from 90 minutes, that's what they had always done, to 360 minutes. Reading instruction, including things, I know what you're thinking, oh my gosh, they should have had that in kindergarten, they should have had that in 1st grade. Sure, they should have had an intact 2-parent family. They should have had parents who checked homework. They should have had fill in the blank here, but they didn't. And so they dramatically improved direct reading instruction, literally to 3 hours a day, with a heavy emphasis on written response to text, not just reading, but writing about what they were reading. What happened? They had 18% of students on grade level before. By January, 38% of students, not great, but a lot better. By May, 72% of students, not perfect, but a lot better. It shouldn't take a federally funded grant to say you spend more time on stuff, you get better at it. But it dismays me to see people complain about students who are not reading on grade level when we continue to do the same thing, allocating the same amount of time, and expect different results. Here's another example. 9th grade math. Freshman math in high schools is one of the highest failure rates in the United States and around the world. They had 62% of students failing math, and it led to course repetitions, student engagement, chronic absenteeism. Gee, I'm just stupid. I just can't do this. So what do? They changed their grading system from the average, that is, let's punish kids in May for the mistakes of January, to using the latest and best evidence. They stopped grading homework, because homework may or may not have anything to do with the word home, and they focused on practice, that is, the real practice done during the class. What happened? They had 62% DFs before, 18% DFs after. Again, not perfect, We can all think of those 18%. Well, that didn't work for that kid. I understand, but it was a dramatic improvement. Here's a social studies example. I just saw this week. They had 120 kids failing due to missing work. What was the change? They called parents, they called homes, immediate intervention every single week. And I don't want to sugarcoat this. This teacher talked about being cussed out by people when she called their home. Nevertheless, she persisted. She went from 120 failures, same teacher, same exams, same students, from 120 failures to 38 failures. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. So I want you to stop again for about 60 seconds and think about some ideas that you might test in your schools. You may not like my ideas, but I'd like you to test some hypotheses in your schools. Take 60 seconds and express some hypotheses about those. See you back here in 60. Okay, so let's come back to large group and talk about some really practical solutions. Again, if you take nothing else away from today, I'm not selling any programs. It's practices, not programs. Indeed, one of the things that I've learned is that if you'll consider doing fewer programs and focuses more on professional practices, you actually get better. So some examples that I've seen around the country. What have we learned in the last 25 years? Change the grading scale. A lot of you have gone to computerized grading systems, and I know with good intention, but please don't assume that any technology corporation is going to do good pedagogy. They're stuck in this 0 to 100 scale that is academically indefensible. Change it to the old-fashioned system. A, B, C, D, F. A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. If you make that change alone, it will dramatically reduce the number of failing grades that you have, because it eliminates the 0 on a 100-point scale that is mathematically and academically indefensible. You can still have a 0, but make the 0 on the 4-point scale. We make sure that we have assignments and weighted grades that are focused on the things that are most important, and that is what students have learned at the end, not necessarily what they did or didn't do 3 months ago. We focus on standards-based grading, and we have opportunities to address what teachers say is most important. So one of the things that I've learned across the way that I just want to share with you is that we have a lot of resources that are free and that can help you help you and help your colleagues. A brand new article coming out literally in the next 2 weeks is called Restoring the Teacher Pipeline and the Profession. Did you know, for example, that across the United States, there's 35% fewer prospective teachers in the pipeline? In California and Michigan, it's down 50%. And I identified 7 things that we can do to restore the teacher pipeline. And yes, as I'm sure you've seen in the strikes, money is a piece of it, but money is number 7 out of 7. There's other things that we need to do to restore the teacher pipeline and restore the profession. For the superintendents on the line, I wrote an article called Supercharged Cabinet Meetings, how to get the most out of those senior level meetings that frankly take a great deal of your time and don't always yield great results. A Next Generation Accountability I wrote with Becky Dufour, based on the new book that the late Rick Dufour and Becky and I wrote about responding to the ESSA. And we believe that you can do accountability right by focusing on causes, not just effects. Another new article called Busting Myths About Grading, published in the All Things PLC journal, and I'll make that available to you for free. A leadership evaluation tool called the Leadership Performance Matrix. Again, you can spend a lot of money and time on these things. This is free. It's already approved by several states to be used as a leadership development instrument. Just ask me and I'll give it to you. and of course, all of the slides from today's presentation. Oh, one more free thing I should just mention to you. If any of you are working on your doctoral dissertation or you have friends or loved ones who are, please note this statistic. 69% never finish their doctoral dissertation. So we started this new group called finishthedissertation.org. It's free, it's not commercial, and all we do is help people cross the finish line. So a final couple of research points, and then I'm going to invite your questions. A really interesting 2018 study asked, how do teachers learn? And the answer, I regret to say, is not inspirational speeches from Doug Reeves. The answer is conferences, colleagues, teacher-focused websites. Way at the bottom are research journals and websites. It's what we're doing right now to support one another that is really how people learn. And here's the other thing. What's most important to teachers when they decide to implement a new practice? Evidence, evidence, evidence. Turns out that evidence-based programs, evidence-based research, 3 times more important than things that are simply endorsed by administrators. So it's not enough to cram things down people's throat and say, this is the district decision, this is the administrator's decision. It's got to be supported by evidence. That's 3 times as important as what principals and districts say. So, in sum, here are some things that you can do to influence student learning. Number 1, it's time. The day-to-day, week-to-week reallocation of time. If you're not happy with where your students are, ask yourself why you would have the same time allocation as you've had for the last 8 months and expect different results. Prioritization. In the studies of thousands of schools that we conducted, we found that 6 or fewer priority initiatives were the hallmark of those systems that did the best, whereas many struggling high poverty schools had dozens, scores of different initiatives. It's efficacy, the bone deep belief that what we do matters. It's communication that's free of jargon and consistent. And of course, we challenge conventional wisdom. Don't believe the things that you hear from the podium or anywhere else. When people say, for example, writing is just so 20th century. Today, kids can just make videos. Well, it's true that they can make videos, but that doesn't make writing obsolete. The evidence from this year is consistent with evidence 2 decades ago that says writing, particularly nonfiction writing, is a key to improving reading comprehension and student learning. The stereotype I hear about boys and girls, boys won't read books. My friend Ray Reutzel challenges that. He and his co-authors say that they will read things if they are at the appropriate level and if they're appropriately engaged. So don't believe the baloney that says boys won't read. And bless her heart, she's on the honor roll. Look around you. I challenge you to look at the evidence that says that girls are doing well just because they're on the honor roll. In fact, we have a disproportionate number of girls on the honor roll, even though their academic achievement is not necessarily better. What they're better at is quiet compliance. And let me ask you, if that's all that our students need, are we really giving our young women and girls the right message that quiet compliance helps you? If that were true, you'd see a lot more women CEOs, a lot more women superintendents. I want to really push back on the negative messages that we're sending our girls and young women. So finally, a few things that I've noticed that are not magic formulas, but rejecting the past. For example, reject the idea that you have to have buy-in. Reject the idea that everybody in a coalition has to agree. You will have disagreement. Indeed, we should value that disagreement. Reject the idea that change takes 5 to 7 years. What I've been showing you today is change that can have an impact literally in 1 semester or 1 academic year. So put those old models of educational change away and grasp the new model of educational change that really can have a good impact. That we move in grading and homework in the right way, that we move away from punishment in sanctions, and that we also have things that really work well for our students. So the last thing that I'll talk about is the power of focus. One of the things that we've learned over the course of time is that if you give people, particularly in high poverty schools, 20 different things to do, and you know what I'm talking about, they wind up focusing on nothing. Give them 3 things to do, and they can focus on those things that have the highest level of leverage. And so what I've learned is things like nonfiction writing, professional learning communities. dramatically related to better achievement in mathematics, in reading, in science, when and only when those professional learning communities are implemented with depth and duration. The last article that Rick Dufour and I wrote together was called The Futility of PLC Light. PLC Light has no impact on student achievement, but professional learning communities with depth and duration have a dramatically positive impact on student achievement. And finally, effective feedback. Feedback that meets what I've called the FAST criteria, F-A-S-T, that is criteria that is fair, accurate, specific, and timely. The evidence in favor of focus is overwhelming. In the schools that we study, those schools that over the course of 3 years had high levels of focus on a few things went from losing almost 18% in math, science, reading, writing, social studies, from losing almost 18% year-to-year gains to gaining almost 12%, a dramatic difference. That was for all the students. Even for the high-performing schools, they almost tripled their performance when they had high performance in terms of focus, prioritization, efficacy. And for the lowest performing schools, this is really important for those of you serving high poverty schools, they were losing 30% a year in academic achievement, and they came back when they had better performance in prioritization, in focus, in specificity, in measurability, and monitoring, almost to even. This really makes a difference. So all I can say is one of the things that we've got to learn is we get our faculty on board and we focus on a few, 6 or fewer priorities. So here's the last thing that I'll leave you with, and then I'm going to invite some questions. How do you do this? How do we get out of initiative fatigue that so many high poverty schools suffer from to focus? The thing that I've done with my colleagues is what we call impact insight, or more colloquially, the initiative, the implementation audit. And that is, we start with just 3 things. Number 1, take inventory. List every single instructional and leadership initiative that you have. Number 2, create implementation rubrics for every one of those. In other words, I know a lot of you are doing Readers and Writers Workshop. You can have the same level of training, the same level of expense, the same level of services and support and all the books and everything else, but wildly different levels of implementation. So we create implementation rubrics for every one of those. The same is true for your positive behavioral support, for your MTSS, whether it's academic achievement, behavior, you name it, wildly different levels of implementation. So the inventory first, the implementation rubric second, and thirdly, we assess the degree of implementation for every single school. And we can answer 2 questions. Number 1, are the things that I'm spending money on really influencing student achievement? And number 2, are they actually even being implemented at all? Because I see a lot of technology programs where you're spending the same money for every single student, for every single teacher. Some are using it, some are not. We ought to be able to find out where it's being used and where it isn't. So all I can say is this is what I've learned from around the country, and I'll close with this very alarming statistic. Where do you find high levels of focus, where the ideas that you've heard in the last few minutes really make sense? Not in high poverty schools. Only 4% of high poverty schools had high levels of focus. Only 2% of high second language schools had high levels of focus. Only 5% of high special education schools had high levels of focus. So the more you need help, the less likely you are to have focus. And I think we have to really challenge those things. So I'm going to stop with that. Please use the question function on your website, and let me close by answering a few questions that we have. And remember, I'll make this entire webinar available for free for any downloads. All the audio, all the visual, all the handouts are yours. So take a few minutes, use the question function, and I'll respond to those briefly. Here's a really interesting thought that one of your colleagues had. What about the issue of reciprocal accountability in terms of training and support for training? And I think by reciprocal accountability, you mean it's not just accountability for kids, it's accountability for what we do as adults. You just nailed the essence of the issue that we discovered in the original research and in the follow-up research. For example, when we found that monitoring was one of the 5 key variables that led to higher achievement in both high poverty schools and low poverty schools, it turned out to be monitoring not just what kids do, but what the adults do. Not just did we go to the training, but did we implement the training? I think you've really implemented a thoughtful idea when you talk about reciprocal training, reciprocal accountability. Here's another one. Children who have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning increase self-efficacy. You know, you're right about that, but I want to add a giant if. They have opportunities to demonstrate their efficacy if and only if their later demonstrations of success are what are prioritized by the teacher. If, in fact, all of those opportunities, including their failures, are held against them, why even show up in April? Why even show up in May? I've already failed. There's nothing that I can do. This only works if you have this relentless optimism that says, I'm going to use the latest and best evidence to evaluate you, not the average of everything you did months in the past. Here's another one. Increasing formative assessment, aligned to priority standards to provide data to collaborative teams will improve instruction and increase achievement levels. Brother, are you right with respect to what you say about formative assessment? I just want to add the following. I had a discussion with some friends about this yesterday on the difference between formative assessment and what we called tongue-in-cheek uninformative assessment. Formative assessment actually informs teaching and learning. Uninformative assessment are those things that so many districts are doing that they make you take kids out of class, take the assignment, and the teachers say, thank God that's over. Now we can go back to what we were doing before. That's not formative. Just because it's not at the end of the year doesn't make it formative. It's only formative if we use it to inform teaching and learning. One last one. When will all this be accessed after the recording? I'll watch it with my leadership team. Hey, of course, I'll make this applicable to everybody. Remember the email dreeves, D-R-E-E-V-E-S, @changeleaders.com, or you can just call me or text me, 781-710-9633. And while I'll make this available, one of the things that I've learned is it's really helpful to build relationships just face-to-face and voice-to-voice. So if you would like to have the sort of things that we've been discussing in the last few minutes done just for your school, I'm happy to do that. It's free, and I'll share whatever I can with you and with your leadership team. So with that, I just want to thank you for your kind attention. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I think is really important research. I'm updating it all the time. So even though some of this research started 25 years ago, I literally have been updating it this week with evidence from schools right now in 2018. I'll continue to do that as long as I can stand upright. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.